what is your takeaway? What do you make of Macron's address that we just heard there?
In terms of his content, he covered the bases. Yeah. In terms of the role that France played in Saint-Domingue, which is now Haiti, in 1791, when the uprising happened, there were 450,000 slaves on that island. 28,000 Métis, 28,000 French. So the enslaved were fighting for exactly the same thing that America fought for in 1776, that France fought for in 1789, they fought for in 1791. We recognize July 4th, we recognize July 14th, but we don't recognize that exact same fight for dignity for human rights that occurred on Saint-Domingue. It led to the first abolition of slavery in 1795 by France, reinstated by Napoleon in 1803, and led finally to the second abolition in 1848.
So you've given us a history there that was much needed. The question for you, Curtis, is the French today aren't directly responsible for the actions of their ancestors, but they certainly are accountable for making the consequences of their wrongful actions right, if there's a way of putting that. How do you think they can achieve this? Because you have Macron making these annual addresses of French leaders. Mm-hmm. It's a rather symbolic gesture. He's talking about educational reforms. Yeah. It's not enough, is it?
Well, no. I mean, there you have it. Yeah, these are great symbolic gestures. But the fact is that we're in 2019. That period is over. We can't keep looking back to that period in terms of how do we redress it. We have to look at how do we deal with it now in 2019, where we continue to have discrimination, where we continue to categorize people in terms of their religion. The anti-Semitism that's going on now is unbelievable. The racism that continues, that sort of thing. So we need to look at the reality on the ground and start addressing it from that standpoint. How do we really create this union?
I will come back to the issue of racism, of course, that you mentioned. We discussed it just before as Macron was speaking. But for now, I want to talk about this question that we're often hearing asked by critics. Why is France, do you think, Professor, lagging behind on this particular issue? Because it struggles somehow to address its past. They approved a law recognizing the slave trade as a crime against humanity only in 2001, of course, and the country pledged to establish this major foundation to create a slavery memorial in 2016. The project is yet to come to fruition. Macron, they're making pledges to actually make sure this does happen. Why are they so behind?
Well, I think it has to do with how we understand this idea of the republic. I mean, the reality is that France in 2019 is made up of people from all over the world. The former colonized West Africa, Asia, from all over the world, on the ground in terms of our institutions, in terms of how do we construct a program where we're going to integrate, include everybody here as part of the project, or are we going to continue to isolate people from different backgrounds, different countries, that sort of thing, in boxes? And I think that sort of Cartesian construction is sort of handcuffed us in terms of what kind of institutions do we have to really bring together this on the ground, this actual on the ground melting pot. I mean, we can't deny it. We look at television, we see one France. We look at the movies, we see one France. We look at the street, we look through the windows of the cafe, and we see the real France, which is made up of people of different ethnicities, of different colors, of different religions, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And we have to really understand that genie is never going back in the bottle.
And this is where a slightly more controversial question comes into play. There is a belief that there surely cannot be racism in France, especially because there's officially no thing such as race. Now, the state does not collect any statistics, as we know, on race or ethnicity. Last year, the word race was actually removed from the French constitution. The updated version only includes gender, origin, or even religion, which is rather shocking, given that this is a country that fought to separate state from the church. What are your thoughts here?
Well, here again, how can we address a situation we don't even know how many people are here from different places? How can we address a situation when we don't know statistically what's happening with employment and unemployment, with housing, for example, in communities? How can we redress these inequalities if we don't look at the inequalities in the face? I mean, we can't pretend like they're not there. And this is one of the things I think that's very frustrating for the people who live in these conditions, and for the people who are, I mean, in a certain sense, who are turning a blind eye. And once again, look, we're all members of the exact same human community. We're all connected to one another, and it's not possible to move forward without recognizing that we are connected. Yes, we have our ethnicities, we have our nations, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. That's great. But at the same time, we are a human community. And we have to begin to start acting like we're a human community, or we're going to continue to have problems.
Sadly, we're a long way away from that. You mentioned that it's difficult for the French to look inequality in the face. And something else that often comes up in debates is the fact that France has long struggled to include minority voices in debates over identity. It seems this struggle really does continue, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does. And it's a struggle along the questions of identity. Look, I'm an American. I'm not French, but I participate in life in France, so I'm part of the French community.
And here you are.
And here I am. Exactly. Can't be excluded.
But of course, you're saying it can't be excluded. We agree with that. But these voices are being excluded from the debate.
Yeah, they are. And the voices are being excluded much to the detriment of the possibilities of the society as a whole. What those voices can contribute to the development of society. We need to hear these voices. There cannot be the voices just simply of a narrow minority, but of the population.
Curtis, there is a fear that this struggle is going to continue, not just here in France, but across Europe. We're seeing this immense rise in the far-right movement, which does include elements of racism, anti-immigration. There are even resurgences of course, white supremacy, not just here, but further afield in the US.
Yeah.
Quite clearly, there's not enough being done to tackle this. And if anything, it seems like it's on the rise.
Well, part of it is it deals with economic issues. It deals with political issues. Part of this idea, it's a class struggle. Part of this idea of keeping minorities at each other's throats is it works for those who have another vision of how society, how the riches of the society should be shared. So it's part of the fact that we have this incredible income inequality going on now in the world. 1% of the population embracing 90-something% of the wealth. This inequality, which is really coming home to roost. I mean, people are just fed up with this. Witness our Gilets jaunes activity that's been going on all of 2019, and as you mentioned, this retrenching to the right because people are looking for a solution. The traditional solutions have exacerbated the situation, and so charlatans come along and promise that we're going to change.
I think the Gilets jaunes is slightly different because this is not a group that has a set leadership. It's one that's and they do have their legitimate grievances.
But here you are. I mean, these are ordinary people, working people who can't figure out why I work hard, I follow all the rules, I walk down the right path, and I can't get ahead. Why do I keep falling behind? And so this is one of the things that led to what's going on in England with Brexit. This is one of the things that led to the election of Viktor Orban in Hungary. This is one of the things that's led to Five Star in Italy, and on and on and on, because people are saying the traditional remedies have not worked for us. They're working for the wealthy. They're not working for us, and they're looking for other kinds of solutions. And our governments must look that in the eye.
And that addresses the issue of economy, the movement that we've been talking about, the Gilets jaunes, that's a yellow vest movement that's been deployed across, of course, France over the past 6 months. The big question for you, Professor, is why is it that we're not here seeing a similar move from the minority community? Why are they not uniting to present this voice and trying to stand up for their rights and perhaps make their own changes from within the system.
Things are going on in minority communities. We don't hear about them. People are coming
Why are we not
together.
hearing about them?
We don't hear about them because the media is not focused there.
Oh, here we are focusing on this, giving it a special program.
We talk about, it's interesting, we talk about, it's the language, it's how we use the language. We talk about les quartiers défavorisés. That already, that says that quarter, only Savoie, Clichy-sous-Bois, wherever you mention it.
We're talking about underprivileged areas here.
It's separate, and so and that articulation, that narrative, freezes those places, and so there are things going on. There are things going on culturally. There are things that are going on in the arts. There are things that are going on in literature. There are conferences being held, but we don't hear about them because we're not interested.
So you just mentioned arts. I'd like to talk about a fierce debate that took on French-speaking social media, took place on French-speaking social media last month around this mural by a French artist, Hervé Di Rosa. The image is hopefully going to come up very shortly. It was painted behind you there to commemorate the abolition of slavery in France's colonies. As you can see here, it's two black faces, smart, exaggerated red lips. And it took an entire campaign to get this removed from the walls of the National Assembly because, of course, this is immensely offensive to the victims of slavery and all their descendants. But to this date, 2019, you said earlier, some people in France don't see this as the problem.
No, because this becomes part of the narrative, and this is a narrative that has not been deconstructed. Look, black people in America were not even considered to be people. They were not human. They were just property, and so therefore they could have no presence in the public sphere, and so therefore the presence that they had was constructed by the whites in America, and it was constructed around caricatures of exactly that, minstrels, and the whole idea was to dehumanize these people, and so it was used. These images were used in advertising. These images were used everywhere, and you know, when you're in the time, that becomes part of what's going the narrative of the time. We're not in that time anymore, and so this is not fun. This is very painful. This is a sharp stick in the eye to the black community. Some collectors of art think this is chic and
they were speaking, including the artist, speaking about censorship.
No, it's not censorship. It's not censorship. Look. Do we have people walking around with yellow stars on their jackets because these kinds of things? No, of course not. And that's not censorship. It's a sensibility to the wrongs that have been exercised against the human community. When we do that to one, we do it to ourselves. And so we have to be. These things, they're in museums and that sort of thing, but we can't bring them out as part of the national narrative. That again, that marginalizes those people. That marginalizes as you say, the victims of these.
Professor Curtis-Young, I'd like to end with just one last question. How hopeful are you, given the current debates that are taking place, given the rise of the far right that we just discussed, given the resurgence of white supremacy?
The thing is that I always bet on human resilience. I really do. I think that we're going through this. I mean, you know, I like to look at history across the longue durée. We're going through this. We're in. It's 200 or 300 years. It's an infancy in terms of the longue durée. And my conviction, my deep conviction, is at a certain point, looking inside, understanding that the solutions that we're looking for are not outside. The solutions that we're looking for are right here inside of every human heart. And eventually we're going to begin to recognize that one after another, and we're going to come together as a human community. I really deeply believe that.
Here's hoping. Professor Curtis-Young, leaving us on a very optimistic note that, as always, it's really wonderful to have your insight.
Thank you so much.
Here on France 24. Thank you for being with us, and thank